We mentioned Speedbird in passing yesterday with Jimmy. So as the LanzaJet representative here, Dan, do you just want to give us a very quick reminder about what Project Speedbird is and all the sort of high-level overview details on that for everyone?
Sure. We on? Beautiful. Thanks, Oscar. Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Daniel Bloch from LanzaJet. So as Jimmy mentioned yesterday, we're obviously a bespoke alcohol-to-jet, ethanol-to-jet technology player and producer. Our Freedom Pines facility is our first-of-a-kind commercial demonstration plant in Georgia, and that's coming in at 30,000 tonnes per annum. Project Speedbird is going to triple in size, so that's going to go to 90,000 tonnes per annum. And as we'll explain today, there's an ongoing process of integrating all the ongoing lessons learned from that Georgia plant into what we're developing in the UK, as well as projects around the world. Clearly, partnerships is essential to getting this right, so really happy to be alongside Nova Pangaea and BA, really essential partners to getting this right for us going forward. So, yeah, look forward to the discussion.
Jonathan, do you want to explain what Nova Pangaea's role in this and a bit more sort of on how the project sort of works technologically as well?
Yeah, and I think there's a visual, if we could put that up as well, just for everybody to see how it all joins together as an end-to-end value chain, and you've got the three, I think, key players here at the table. So we'll be taking, as Nova Pangaea, biomass waste residues, most probably to start with forestry residues, but we can also take other forms of agricultural residue, and converting that through a rapid pyrolysis process into ethanol, as well as a co-product biochar, which we can talk about later. But the key USP, I think, to this whole program, or this whole project, is its negative carbon intensity. The ethanol will then be converted by LanzaJet and blended and supplied into the airports for use by IAG. Nova Pangaea has a demonstration plant already in the north of England, and this will be the first commercial. We'll be making multiple plant investments to feed the ethanol for the 90,000 tonnes of renewable fuel output. And the key point here is the carbon intensity, the carbon dioxide removal that we'll be achieving as a result of Project Speedbird, because of the negative carbon intensity, amounts to nearly 500,000 tonnes per annum. So, whereas it may only be roughly 1% of the total jet fuel demand, when you take into account the negative carbon density, it's actually nearly 2% of the GHG reduction we're aiming to achieve.
And Jim, what sold IAG to get involved in this project particular? What sort of drew you to it, and what is sort of your sort of more day-to-day sort of involvement? How sort of involved in it are you?
Well, in terms of the history of it, we first invested into LanzaJet in 2021, early 2021. But we worked with LanzaJet and LanzaTech before that in actually helping to develop the LanzaJet business model. Our strategy on SAF, I think just everywhere IAG is part of a number of airlines, British Airways, Aer Lingus, Iberia, Vueling, Level. We have a pretty big jet demand, and we recognise that we need to get SAF, and for many years we've moved up the supply chain. But only recently in the history of the airlines have we moved into the manufacturing, because we recognise that we need to stimulate that market. The risk really isn't on the oil companies, it's on the airlines. The oil companies, there was a session yesterday about why aren't the oil companies doing anything, and people say, well, they're obligated. Well, actually, they're obligated to supply, but they're not obligated to supply. If they can't get their head around the risk, they'll just walk away from the market. They don't make all their money from aviation, they make it from selling other products and trading other products. So going back to our involvement in 2021, we recognise we have to stimulate it, we have to point our buying power more towards the renewables and away from fossil. But it's a long journey, and that investment actually provided us rights to effectively offtake from Speedbird. But what we don't like doing is going from nothing to a big 100,000-ton fuel plant, and people recognised at the time we needed to build Freedom Pines. So we're a committed off-taker. Jimmy was on stage yesterday. We're one of those off-takers who've got a 10-year off-take agreement, and that needed to be in place for the financing for that facility and for Topco and LanzaJet. So that's the sort of the history of it. And so now we are forced forward to 2025. So it's quite a long journey. We're at entering into feed for Speedbird. So that's our involvement. We have a strategy of diversification of pathways, technologies, feedstocks. We're not exclusive to anybody. Here is LanzaJet, but we have other interests in LanzaJet that isn't necessarily LanzaJet. So even though we're an investor in LanzaJet, we like the technology. We're not exclusive to them or to anyone else. But the key thing about the alcohol-to-jet pathway is that we recognise that HEFA is going to cap out on feedstocks. So we need alternative advanced fuels technologies where sustainable feedstocks are abundant, but the processing capacity is yet to be developed. So that's our role. It's not really on HEFA. We see merchant facilities starting up. So our role is stimulating exactly the same technologies that Jonathan and Dan have talked about, which is different from airlines. Airlines are not used to playing that role, and selling that concept to airlines who are used to buying commodities, champagne, orange juice, baggage services, uniforms, and now you go to SAF and actually manufacturing SAF, very complex things that have significant risk. And it will be late, and it'll cost more, and airlines can't quite get their head around that actually these things are difficult. They're very difficult.
You touched on it there. You're not exclusive to this project. You've got, you're working with other producers around the world. LanzaJet have got other projects they're working on around the world. How do you sort of balance sort of working this partnership against sort of all the other things that are going on around the world? What makes sort of a good sort of partnership where you can sort of make progress in this project specifically?
Yeah, I might jump in here. And in many respects, it actually commands a lot of respect for what Jim has just spoken about there. We're really cognizant of the need to scale this industry worldwide. And so it wouldn't make sense for IAG or British Airways to be exclusive to any one technology or player. We need to see the scaling of all these different technologies around the world. And I think ICF captured it really well yesterday, demonstrating the wedge that exists between HEFA and PTL. And so as a consequence, we need to make a really compelling business case in the advanced biofuel space, but as do the likes of many of the other SAF producers in this room. And so to that effect, I think from a partnership perspective, getting the alignment of vision and mission, the mission-driven businesses that have those shared values really, I think, go a long way further. So Jonathan touched upon the negative CI scores. This is critical. An appreciation for advanced technologies beyond HEFA, albeit also recognising the role of HEFA too. BA, IAG demonstrate that in spades, and on our end, trying to play our role in facilitating this transition. So it's really a values-driven partnership in many respects.
And if I may add, this partnership, which is working well here in the UK, we all have the intent and the need to scale up globally. And we're all very mature about this. We may not be working as a tripart joint development partnership in every market, and that's okay. But we need to be using the UK Speedbird project as a showcase that then shows people this can work in what is, to be frank, one of the highest cost countries in the world to scale up a project like this. If we can do it here, and we have got the right kind of supportive policy framework, then that's a really great calling card to develop similar projects elsewhere and take our technology. And whether we do it together or not doesn't really matter.
You mentioned the carbon negative nature of the projects come up. You've mentioned biochar as well, that's a co-product. How important are sort of those two aspects in sort of the revenues that you can derive from specifically the co-product in sort of attracting investment, enticing people like IAG to put sort of money into projects like this?
It's absolutely key because the yield otherwise without the biochar would the biochar contributes to the economics as an additional revenue stream because it has applications in its own right. First and foremost as a soil enhancer, as you can see on this chart. There's a really nice circular story that it can be deployed in the rural communities, in the farming sector, to help regenerate the quality of the soil. But it can also be used in other applications such as construction as a cement filler, or even in a higher end, in the ferroalloy industry, or in higher performance materials, composite materials even. So there's actually quite a lot of product development to do here, and I think we can't even see all the potential for it. So it's got it's a revenue, second revenue stream in its own right, but the key is it sequesters a hell of a lot of CO2 in the process. And so that's a third attribute, a revenue stream, if you like, which either is bundled together with the SAF to fulfill the mandate, or is sold separately, depending on the market regulation. It's also worth noting there are some other side streams as well, CO2 and the like, which we can and fully intend to monetize as well. So all that comes together in the economic investment proposition, both in the UK but likewise elsewhere, because we want to license this technology, scale it up, and that's the calling card. Together with, yes, it works technically and we could deliver it, the economics work as well.
Jim, was it a big consideration for IAG, this sort of co-products? Obviously, you're basically interested in the SAF, especially. So does it sort of, how much does it come into consideration for you guys when you're looking at sort of putting money into it, or is it sort of a bonus, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's all about the carbon, not necessarily about arbitrary volume. We've got a number of issues about UK policy, but one of the good things they put in place is a greenhouse gas-based system. Whereas in Europe, you've got this arbitrary 70%, and if you just get 71, it's sustainable. If it's 69, it isn't. So it drives perverse outcomes. So we like the carbon sequestration. Our roadmap is a carbon roadmap. We keep things simple in terms of we communicate. We talk about volume because people understand that rather than grams CO2, but that sort of thing. But ultimately, if we can deliver our carbon reduction through less volume, that's easy because I don't have to buy and build 4 Speedbird plants. I have to, don't listen too much. I only have to build 1, maybe, or 2. So the capital employed for that would be less. And it's challenging getting one project off the ground. So you're always looking when you're developing things for the easiest path to get to where you want to get to, and one of them, and probably where we spend most time, is on risk, because ultimately I need to persuade my execs that the risk of doing nothing is greater than doing something. And the reason why we talk about Project Speedbird as a holistic, I mean, there is Speedbird Limited, which is the LanzaJet, but the two enterprises are separate. They have to stand on their own feet. Yeah, there's and it was too much risk to have it as a combined enterprise. It has to be separate. So you stress test anything. Well, what happens? If Speedbird doesn't, the LanzaJet doesn't, but Nova Pangaea does. Nova Pangaea's technological journey is about 2-3 years behind LanzaJet. That's not to say it's good or bad, it's just recognizing where they are. And we would never be able to finance Speedbird Limited, LanzaJet, without a diverse supply of feedstocks. You cannot get to FID with just one highly dependent supplier of feedstock. Now, not that Nova Pangaea can make it, because they've got a journey to scale. If people come to me and say they can scale in 2 years and they can commission in 3 months, they either don't know what they're doing or they're being slightly disingenuous. So it's recognizing, the strengths of each of the partners and saying, well, how can we best de-risk the project? Recognizing there will be risk, but how can you minimize that risk?
Yeah, and just to jump in, so to give a specific sort of reflection on our side, on the feedstock side, it's been really essential for us to secure essentially provisions for twice the amount this facility requires, which we'll look to lock in from a binding perspective as we roll up closer to FID. So yeah, it's very much fundamental to de-risking the operation.
The project's located in Teesside. That's been sort of recently confirmed. Why pick up there? Was it to do with sort of feedstock? What sort of comes into consideration when you're choosing a location for projects like this?
Yeah, it's really not about reinventing the wheel, to be honest with you. There's no sort of magic sort of dot on the map. What it is about is looking at our enabling environment in terms of what it is required to deliver an optimised sort of SAF facility. So being in and around an industrial cluster like Teesside, where there's been so much regional support to basically, regenerate this new economy up there with green industrial clusters. So you've got obviously from a utilities perspective, plenty of options up that way. We've partnered with Semcor, so we've selected Wilton International site up in the north there in Teesside, and so we get to tap into a very reputed business's sort of facility, along with a number of different utilities as a consequence. You've also got the Freeport up there as well, so in that line of sight of the feedstocks we're talking about, it's predominantly local based, but if there's some coming in from, for example, France, we've got the Freeport to come in there as well. And beyond that as well, from a regional government perspective, the amount of work that is going into attracting talent and establishing more and more businesses, it's no surprise that other companies have also chosen to locate their SAF facilities up there. So it's really not about reinventing the wheel when it comes to site selection. The matrices are going to be pretty consistent.
It's not because you're all Middlesbrough football fans.
You'd be horried as to who my English football fan is.
Or do you have to be Middlesbrough football fans now?
No. I would just add to that, you obviously want all the normal things that you want for an industrial facility, like availability of utilities, the renewable power sources, which will once again, of course, kick in to improve further the carbon intensity of the end-to-end process. But what I would also say about the Nova Pangaea plant investments is we will have multiple sites, not just one, to feed the alcohol to jet conversion facility set up by LanzaJet. A key factor is proximity to feedstock and the logistics costs associated with bringing that feedstock to the plants. So we're looking at multiple sites, including in Scotland and multiple sites in the north of England that have good logistics access as well as proximity to feedstock. And we'll be sourcing the feedstock domestically, but we also always need the option, as Daniel said, to import if need be. So port location is obviously ideal.
I think I just come in, but our company is very active in downstream jet logistics. We run rail operations. If any train spotters out there, if you see some grey wagons, tubular wagons, they're ours, and they're moving jet fuel. We run the largest the largest freight operation in the UK. We run trucks and we operate. We have partners who move our product through pipelines. So we've moved up. I mean, in terms of location, which is the question, the downstream, we can make it work. It's not the most difficult thing. People have built pipes. People have built, not that it's easy to build pipelines in this country because we've tried it. But it's been done before. People have built tanks. It's not the most challenging thing of the project. What we're trying to avoid, and which Jonathan was touched on, is you're trying to avoid moving low-density feedstocks, low-density carbon feedstocks, long distances. So effectively, one of the first things you look at is where's your feedstock arisings from, and that's typically, people think, well, you need all these plants in an airport, and that's the last thing you want, because typically land is expensive and your feedstock arisings are somewhere else. So you're moving towards low-cost area where you're likely to get planning, where the feedstocks are, how you're going to get the feedstocks. That's typically what we look. And the downstream jet logistics, we just make happen. And Wilton isn't the best place to move jet fuel around, but it's doable. We've got jetty access. We can move it to where we want to. It's just not connected to the existing jet fuel pipeline system, but we'll make it work.
On that, what are the sort of other challenges that present themselves when you're working on a project like this that people might not necessarily be aware of? Because obviously it's a huge undertaking.
Well, in many respects, I mean, if you look at what any energy major, oil and gas major are looking at from a project development standpoint, it's all very similar, just with a much smaller team. In terms of Project Speedbird at LanzaJet, I think we've got 8 full-time people working on the project itself, along with 3 colleagues, myself included, that more look at the global business. But the amount of interface and touch points is just staggering. I mean, particularly now that we've completed pre-feed and going into feed, we're looking to secure all of our planning for EPC, and so it's contractors, it's suppliers, but you're also, trying to build up your PR in the region and establish, a relationship with the Teesside community that's going to last for hopefully 20 years or beyond. And so as a consequence, you're sort of everywhere. And you really have to be leaning into every facet of your skill set as a small team. So I think the biggest challenge is that every single day, you never know exactly what the next challenge or interaction is going to look like, good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah, coordination of multiple aspects of a supply chain, different technologies, different materials, different entities, partners that you need to pull in, as well as your internal resource. But we need to remember that at Speedbird, we're talking here about, plus or minus £1 billion. When it's all said and done, this is not small stuff. Energy transition is hard.
What's government support looked like? Has it sort of helped things move along? How important is it for actually being able to progress projects like this? Because you mentioned that it's very expensive and difficult to do big projects like this in the UK.
Well, I think already yesterday we talked about how, if SAF was the same price as fossil jet fuel, then there'd be no issue, but it isn't, and that's in part because the carbon price of fossil jet fuel has not been recognised. Hence, you've got a market failure that has to be addressed by supportive policy. And whether it sticks carrots or a mix of both, that's clearly critical to help both the demand side and the supply side. And as Jim said, I think there's a lot that's right around the UK SAF policy in terms of the mandate, the focus on GHG, greenhouse gas emission reduction, which is obviously what it's all in aid of at the end of the day. But there's more to be done in terms of stimulating the supply side. We know about the revenue certainty mechanism, which is being developed, which I think will be really critical to standing up first-of-a-kind plants and technologies in the UK. But we all know we can't rely on a life support system like that ad infinitum. We need to bring the cost curve down as we scale up. And so become increasingly competitive, especially when you take into account the carbon value. So policy is absolutely essential, but it's also essential in the aviation world that there's some commonality across the different regions, as we discussed yesterday.
On our end, what I'd touch upon is a little bit around that sort of pre-FID finance. So we've received advanced fuel funding from the DFT twice now through the 2 rounds, and we'll be going up for the 3rd. That pre-FID finance is always the hardest to attract, particularly in the middle. Like, the upfront capital is one thing, and we're really lucky to have those world-class investors that Jimmy mentioned upon his session yesterday, including IAG, but really across the breadth of the SAF value chain. But it's really in between, before you're going up to FID, that's the hardest to attract investment. So receiving advanced fuel funding is just essential. It's such a big help in being able to get through that tricky valley of death that everyone would be quite familiar with in the room. So, yeah, it's critical.
And Jim, IAG have been pretty front and central in working with governments and sort of industry, being representative in industry bodies, sort of trying to put the right policy ingredients in place to sort of allow you guys to get access to the SAF you guys need.
Yeah, just, you got another session after this about policy, and I'm sure they'll go into a deeper dive on that, but just picking up, some of the earlier comments. The AFF grant has been helpful, certainly in that valley of death. I mean, we operate in our ventures program, so we do early stage. We're involved in like TRL level 5 through to 9, and it's that pre-FID gap that's post-ventures. Ventures is not really used to investing in high capital. These are high cap, $1 billion. Yeah, it's not, repeat, follow on. It's that area that we're quite active in, because if we ultimately, the airlines are exposed to increasing regulation for being effectively polluters, then we need to do something. We need to actively be in that area. I think there's sufficient for the right project at FID. There's a lot of infrastructure capital out there, freely, but to get to FID is a challenge. In terms of policy support, good that the UK has a greenhouse gas-based system. Not good that they haven't. Effectively, it's all stick. So apart from the AFF, but if you look at what airlines contribute through, APD, the air passenger duty, and through ETS, the EU, they're offering free allowances. UK, nothing. So it's all stick. So our advocacy is that no, it needs to balance out, because ultimately it's cheaper for airlines, our competitors, to decarbonise on the European continent than it is in the UK. And also, and you'll touch on the RCM, the revenue certainty mechanism. So we have some concerns about it's very challenging for airlines to decarbonise. It's probably the most challenging of all the sectors to decarbonise. So we need more policy support on the carrot side than the stick. We recognise there needs to be a stick ultimately, but we need more. So larger grant funding would be helpful. So the EU Innovation Fund, there's a lot of work going on in the EU looking to repurpose revenues from ETS back into to help airlines decarbonise. And we don't see it in the UK. The RCM, we think the RCM role should be around incubating great British technologies. It shouldn't be about building a huge SAF industry necessarily in the UK. There are some projects that work very well, but don't force it. Yeah, don't force the airlines to bank a huge industry that isn't going to drive the lowest cost of production for eligible and sustainable fuels. That's not the right direction that the UK government should go. And it should be actively in the area that we are, which is to help projects get to FID.
How much time is spent? We've mentioned they're very expensive. It's very hard to bridge the gap, get to FID. How much time is dedicated to looking to funding versus, just the day-to-day, just technicality of getting projects like this built? It's probably not an insignificant amount of time.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, if you're a smaller company, you've got to know how you're going to fund the next year, the next project, the next phase of the project. If you're a large company with a big balance sheet, the process by which you can make a decision is simple, and it's internal, effectively.
You'd be better off asking, have you ever not thought about financing, to be honest with you. It's a constant process. You're always looking for your different sources, and once you complete one stage gate, you're just on to the next. Beyond the discussions we've had sort of already today from the government perspective, clearly there's going to be discussions at a project level once we sort of go beyond our feed and understanding expectations from banks who are looking to eventually commit debt, but also needing to see that the technology is de-risked, that your revenue is assured, that the demand signals are there. So there's clearly a number of different factors that go into thinking about it. And reflecting upon LanzaJet, it's been a 15-year journey just to get to sort of this point in conversation, from incubating a lab scale technology to now, and really we're only just at the stage where we can start meaningfully have those discussions with project level financiers, given the commercial demo dynamic. The other one that is of interest here in the UK, I guess, is the National Wealth Fund. They're a £28 billion government-backed budget, and they're sort of coming in with the intent of saying, look, we'll be up to sort of 4 times sort of the risk appetite than a traditional private bank. So might be another source of option for finance for not just us, but the broader SAF industry here locally.
There's the dichotomy of, it takes 15 years to get to the stage where you have these conversations with banks or investors like this that are going to finance these projects. They're very complicated conversations, as we found out yesterday. We spent an hour just sitting down discussing it all and didn't get to any conclusive answers, which wasn't the plan. But we so they take time, but we need to. Then there's an element of urgency to all this as well. There are timelines, there are targets that have been set that we've got to meet. So projects do need to get on the line. So you've got to really push these conversations and try and find ways of engaging collaboratively with the people with the money at the end of the day to invest in these projects.
Yeah, especially if you look at the trajectory we've got with the mandate, HEFA will provide the lion's share of the SAF for the near future, but from 2028 onwards, the contribution from advanced fuels using other renewable feedstocks needs to increase, so the clock's already ticking, and we need to move fast.
We've got a couple of questions from the audience. We'll go with the top one. Is IG not concerned about being priced out on their project selection? What are you doing to mitigate SAF cost exposure you're taking? It's a nice, easy one for you.
Well, I'll just back up. So, last year we moved into our aircraft 162,000 tons of SAF. That's the largest quantity of any airline in the world. So we're quite proud of what we've managed to achieve. And we're buying SAF in the US. We're a top 10 lifter of jet in the US. We're lifting now SAF actively in Europe and in the UK. We were the first company. It wasn't an oil company. It was us who brought the first cargo of SAF into the UK. So we're very active in that. To date, we've committed over, it's in our annual report and accounts, it's an audited figure. We've committed over $3.5 billion of binding investments and offtakes, and a lot of that money is out of the door already. So we're very active. Going back to the question, it's about, and so if there's one tip, if there's any airlines in the room there, what I would suggest is that it takes us a while to get an offtake agreement over the line, as these folk know. And one of the things you should be doing is getting those financing people close to that negotiation. We're not in the business of negotiating fantastic offtake agreements that have no hope of being financed, and they just sit on a shelf and gather dust. So where we see that things have been successful is where lenders, but it's typically investors, are close to those agreements, if not actually at the table at the same time. It's more likely. But going back to the question, which is, well, how do we manage risk? Well, I said earlier that, well, the risk of doing something has to be lower than the risk of doing nothing. That's one thing. There's the risk of doing something, but why this one rather than that one? So all our offtake agreements, it's about understanding what this project needs to be financed. So that's why you need really talking to the investor. The developer is just a proxy for the investor, and understanding what size of pill we can swallow, the risk pill we can swallow. So they all come in different guises. So mainly today, HEFA is bought on a Fossil Plus or an Argus, as those indices are becoming a little bit more liquid now. So there isn't a single rule. There are many approaches we take. That's why it takes a lot of time. They're all very bespoke agreements. So it takes time to get us, and I imagine any other airline across, or all company, because they're used to buying commoditized stuff. Maybe, Jonathan, you work for an oil company. You're used to buying stuff that's been bought before, and you've got general terms and conditions. In fact, the main GTs and Cs for moving jet around is the BP 2015. It's all very straightforward, simple, because it's been done many. But SAF is very different. So everybody's innovating, pioneering on many fronts, including negotiating offtake agreements. But they have to work for all parties, not just one.
If I may just add, it's not just about mitigating cost with portfolio of options. It's also about thinking about the revenue and the customer side. IG have been a great leader in terms of, as discussed yesterday, explaining the value proposition to the end customers, especially corporate customers, who Patrick spoke about as well, want to reduce their net Scope 3 carbon emissions. So also looking at the revenue side of this to help make the equation work.
We've got a couple of questions about sort of alcohol to jet and why IG is looking at that versus HEFA, and the cost difference between sort of HEFA and alcohol to jet. What are your thoughts on HEFA SAF compared to sort of alcohol to jet?
Yeah, it's not one or the other. I mean, today the only SAF you can buy is HEFA SAF. If anybody knows of any producer that's producing what we call advanced SAF, then, well, tell me, because I'm not aware of anybody who's reached that scale. I think your facility is the first demo scale alcohol jet facility in the world. So it's not one or the other. I said earlier, we have a strategy of diversifying. There's not one pathway that's going to solve the decarbonation of aviation. There'll be multiple solutions out there. HEFA, it's when people talk about SAF, they think it's one single thing. But SAF, what we call HEFA first generation, I think it's going to be reasonably well supplied to 2030, 2031, depending on if China brings in a mandate, then all bets are off. But you've got, quite good capacity in processing the feedstocks, but the feedstocks are ultimately going to cap out. And the opposite is true for advanced SAF, where you've got abundant feedstocks, but no processing capacity that's managed to scale today. Yeah, so that's our role, is to do that. So our sort of ventures and our origination activity isn't looking at HEFA at all. We're buying a lot of HEFA in our prompt, and we bring ships in, and it's all working fine. What we do find is that when we're buying jet fuel, we never really see any upstream problems with refining, because there are plenty of refineries. So if one refinery has a problem, there's a fire, an explosion, planned maintenance, there's plenty of jet in the market. We just buy another ship, and the airport never really sees that sort of ripple effect. But with SAF, you've only got a few bulk suppliers. Last year, I said we got quite a big SAF supply chain operation, and we had 3 of our 7 suppliers were having problems. Yeah, and then you notice it, because if you've got a SAF supplier that has a problem, you can't easily go to the spot market because it doesn't really exist. So that's the challenges for aviation. Does that answer the question? Yep.
Maybe just another point. Sorry if I missed it, but there's also, in the UK, there's also HEFA caps to be put into consideration. And so, again, it's a pretty strong market signal here, at least locally, the importance of, the technologies beyond HEFA. And to be honest, in a way, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling sort of policy, because we just, Jim's touched upon already the limitation of the bio-oil-based feedstocks for HEFA, the reliance on UCO imports as well, and thinking about how those sources might be reallocated when and if China pulls the trigger on their own mandate. From the perspective of ATJ and talking about sort of cost and pricing of ATJ, there's an element of sort of, ICAO, the LTAG, that was passed 3 years ago. We're looking at 90% of SAF volume. If HEFA caps out at 10%, 90% of your SAF volume out to 2050 is coming from true breakthrough technology, first-of-a-kind facilities and technology in the context of a SAF application. And we're 3 years into that journey post-ICAO, and we're talking about why is ATJ cost so high? Well, guys, this is a first-of-a-kind technology. Of course, in the initial instances, the price is going to be reflecting the risk, all of which that have been mentioned today and yesterday. Clearly, the cost curve is going to be coming down over time, especially when you start tapping into waste-based feedstocks. Again, thinking about what it is you're leveraging to produce your fuel. By definition, if they're low value to society, that is going to be reflected in your price ultimately. Whereas UCO, we know, limited supply, therefore it's going to be priced at similar levels to jet fuel itself these days. So that really is the selling point to advanced biofuels. It can tap into a much lower operational cost once the technologies are actually scaled.
Has anyone got any questions from the floor, not on Slido old school? No? Okay, well, someone wants to know the price and the offtake agreements. I'm not sure we'll be able to say that. But it stands to reason that the pricing component of an offtake agreement that came up yesterday is so critical, both for you in terms of protecting your side, but equally in terms of making agreements bankable for the producers as well. So the price, finding sort of the pricing point to satisfy all parties in an offtake agreement is a really important aspect to consider.
These are take-or-pay agreements, and but they don't work the other way around. So so a producer can't really get financed if you have obligations to supply, and if their facility doesn't supply, they need to get something, well, they can't because it doesn't exist, and they won't never be able to finance on those terms. So, part of the due diligence is around what's the likelihood of you being there. I'm giving you this agreement. What's the likelihood of you being financed? So, because if I put my offtake with you, that means I'm foregoing opportunities elsewhere potentially. So, part of that is to say, it is a journey. All these got a journey to do, but you're having to make a judgment as to say, well, is this project more likely to make it than the other project? So it's not just about price. Price is clearly important, and we need to stand by the price. But alcohol-to-jet is interesting. We're not interested in the sort of the first generation because there's no. It's not even eligible. 1G, 80J isn't eligible, which is a separate conversation, I think, on whether it should be or shouldn't be, because aviation in the UK is held to a higher bar than the RTFO from ground fuels, which I would say is unreasonable. But our interest in 80J is in the advanced. So we see it as one of the lower risk, lower cost, as Dan says, not necessarily in the first demo, but it has the potential to meet a lower cost than alternative technologies. Not to say there's other alternative technologies that are very good. Wastefront is investment. We think clearly where we move, we think there's potential for them to A, build it, and B, price it to enable us to compare it to the competing technologies. But we won't just place a bet on one. We place our offtakes on many. So I think there's a question there about, are we going to offtake exclusively of IAG and Speedbird? Well, we have got those rights, but we won't be offtaking everything. I mean, it produces a diesel, and there's one of the great things about LanzaJet technology is it's got this high selectivity, which helps us manage the risk on that transition, because it's quite a large plant, and it may produce a bit more diesel in the early years, and then we ramp up the jet side. So what we don't like is going things alone. We will never be a single investor, and we will never be a single off-taker. It's just not where we want to be. And we talked about oil companies yesterday. We are more comfortable if there's an oil company investor into that project. So LanzaJet, you've got Shell, and you've got Mitsui, Suncor, Canada's biggest. That gives us comfort. That's where our due diligence sits, is people who know about chemistry and chemical processing technologies, because we're an airline, we don't necessarily know that. That gives us comfort. And on the offtake, we don't really want to be on our own on the offtake. So we like off-taking. Competitors, great. It could be Alliance Airlines, great. But we won't offtake by ourselves.
I think we have run out of time, and so these guys will be around if you've got any other questions. We didn't get round to it. Thank you, gents, so much. That was a great conversation.